Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Q-Man channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie The Mummy Returns from 2001. The familiar dust motes dance in the golden light, spilling into a surprisingly cozy London townhouse, a testament to the success that followed the rather tumultuous events in Hamunaptra years prior. Rick O'Connell, now a celebrated adventurer settled into domesticity, finds his quiet life perpetually punctuated by the spirit of adventure. Or, perhaps more accurately, the spirit of his incredibly energetic young son, Alex. Alex, already showing a distinct knack for history that mirrors his father's own initial reluctance and eventual embrace of the exotic, unearths something significant. Perhaps a small artifact that whispers of impending doom. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carnahan O'Connell, whose keen intellect and surprising bravery turned her from a meticulous librarian into an adventurer of renown, is wrestling with the pressures of fame and motherhood. Her brother, Jonathan Carnahan, bless his perpetually luck-seeking heart, is still chasing fleeting riches, often stumbling into trouble that, inevitably, Rick and Evie must clean up. It's a testament to the enduring, if often chaotic, partnership formed between the bookish intellectual, the pragmatic explorer, and the slightly larcenous but loyal comic relief. The catalyst arrives swiftly. The ancient, malevolent spirit of the Scorpion King, Imhotep's former master, is stirring. This time, the threat manifests through a cursed necklace and a reawakening of dark forces in the Egyptian desert. Evie, perhaps seeking a return to the excitement that first bonded her and Rick. A bond forged in the heat of uncovering lost secrets, much like the inspiration drawn from the grand historical epics she devoured in her youth, dons the bracelet, unintentionally becoming a vessel for the wicked Queen Nefertiri. The journey back to Egypt is, naturally, less of a vacation and more of a desperate race against time. Rick, whose actions in previous adventures have clearly honed his instincts to near superhuman levels, is fiercely protective, yet constantly amazed by Evie's unwavering dedication to deciphering the ancient texts, even when those texts are actively trying to destroy the world. Their bond, cemented by shared near-death experiences, feels utterly authentic, moving beyond mere romance into a shared, slightly manic partnership. The film plunges us into thrilling set pieces. We see Alex, resourceful beyond his years, caught up in the action, perhaps navigating ancient traps with the innate cunning of someone who has grown up surrounded by relics and danger. Jonathan, unsurprisingly, finds himself in comical peril, often only escaping due to sheer luck or the timely intervention of others. A running gag that never quite wears thin, echoing the archetypal sidekick who survives through sheer obliviousness. The climax pits the O'Connells against the rising power of the Scorpion King, a physical manifestation of terror commanding vast armies of the undead. Rick, ever the man of action, relies on his military training and brute force, while Evie must confront the dark influence Nefertiri exerts over her mind, utilizing her knowledge not just of history, but of human, and perhaps inhuman psychology. The entire affair is a frantic scramble to stop an apocalypse, driven less by intellectual curiosity this time, and more by the fierce instinct to protect their family and the world they've become accustomed to saving. The final confrontation is a symphony of explosions, ancient curses broken, and the satisfying, if slightly over the top, defeat of evil, allowing the heroes to return, perhaps a little more weary, but firmly united once more under the Egyptian sun. The atmosphere in the O'Connell household, despite the luxurious trappings of their London life, always feels slightly temporary, as if any moment a map might unfurl on the mahogany dining table and they'd be off again. Rick, whose rugged demeanor often masks a deep-seated loyalty, carries the weight of a man who knows true peace is fleeting. His eyes, accustomed to scanning horizons for threats, are now frequently drawn to the doorway, checking on his wife and son. He possesses a certain world-weariness, born not of boredom, but of having seen too much ancient horror juxtaposed against modern comforts. Evelyn, conversely, seems to thrive in the chaos. Her transformation from the shy Egyptologist who needed rescuing into the equal partner who often engineers the rescues is remarkable. One can picture her in her study, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, feeling a profound pull toward the danger she now confronts not merely academically, but physically. When she takes on the spirit of Nefertiti, there's a palpable tension as the precise, careful nature of Evelyn clashes with the ruthless, ancient ambition channeled through her. It's a struggle showcasing her mental fortitude, a quality perhaps inherited from her archaeologist father, whose legacy she strives to honor and surpass. Jonathan, of course, remains the embodiment of opportunistic charm. His presence in Egypt this time is less about scholarly pursuit and more about the pursuit of gold rumored to be tied to the Scorpion King's tomb, a reflection of his career trajectory where high-stakes adventures are merely seen as opportunities for unparalleled, if ill-gotten, financial gain. His panicked reactions and clumsy attempts at bravery serve as necessary comedic counterpoints to the deadly seriousness of the unfolding crisis, grounding the supernatural threat in a recognizable, flawed humanity. Alex, their son, represents the legacy, a third-generation adventurer already possessing a surprising understanding of dangerous situations. His abduction or entanglement in the quest is the true emotional lever that moves Rick and Evie past mere duty and into desperate action. He isn't just a plot device. He's the living symbol of the future they are fighting to preserve. When Alex deciphers an obscure symbol or navigates a collapsing corridor, it's clear that the spirit of adventure, the very thing Rick tried to leave behind, has claimed his son, creating an inheritance he must now help his son survive. The resurrected threat, the Scorpion King, is portrayed with a terrifying grandeur, drawing upon the cinematic iconography of powerful, ancient deities. A spectacle that reminds the audience that these heroes are constantly pitting modern resourcefulness against forces designed millennia ago to crush mortal will. The resulting battles are not just physical tests, but examinations of their enduring faith in each other. Every shared glance across a battlefield crawling with mummies speaks volumes about years of mutual reliance forged in tombs and desert sands, suggesting that even facing oblivion, the O'Connells operate as a cohesive, if perpetually stressed, unit. The desert heat itself feels like an adversary, relentless and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the cool, damp air of London they had just left. Rick, now clad in sun-bleached practical gear that speaks more of utility than fashion, moves with an economy of motion honed by years of dodging ancient traps and modern mercenaries. His protectiveness over Alex during the chase sequences is fierce, almost primal. It's the quiet acknowledgement that, unlike the past, where death was often a professional hazard, now it carries the unbearable weight of leaving a child behind. His love for Evelyn manifests not in flowery speeches, but in the way he seamlessly anticipates her needs, handing her a necessary artifact or covering her flank without needing a word exchanged. A non-verbal communication system developed under extreme duress. Evelyn's possession by Nefertiti introduces a fascinating internal conflict. When the Queen's aura surfaces, one sees a chilling stillness overlaying Evie's familiar features. It's a performance within a performance. The actress playing the Queen must briefly suppress the loving mother and devoted historian. This possession highlights the precarious balance she maintains. She wields knowledge like a weapon, but that same knowledge can be turned against her by the very secrets she seeks. Her internal battle is about maintaining sovereignty over her own mind, a fight far more intimate and terrifying than any skirmish with mummies. Jonathan, predictably, finds himself embroiled in the treasures again. But this time, his cowardice is laced with a desperate attempt to prove his worth, however accidentally. He trips into key solutions or runs away from danger so fast that he inadvertently clears a path for the heroes. His survival mechanisms, while comical, are a necessary reflection of the ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances, a humorous foil to Rick's unwavering competence. He seeks validation, perhaps, hoping that this grand adventure, unlike the smaller scores, might finally earn him genuine respect rather than just exasperated tolerance from his sister. Alex, the true inheritor of this peculiar legacy, displays an almost uncanny ability to bridge the gap between historical artifact and modern application. He doesn't just read the ancient warnings, he understands the mechanism behind them. This suggests that while Rick found adventure accidentally, Alex is being born into it, a natural-born explorer whose playground involves relics that could end the world. His youthful enthusiasm for the puzzle-solving aspect of their predicament is both endearing and alarming to his parents. The visual spectacle of the Scorpion King's army rising underscores the scale of the threat. These are not the shambling horrors of before. This is an organized, imposing legion, demanding more than just bullets and bravery. It requires a synthesis of all their skills: Rick's tactical command, Evelyn's esoteric understanding, and Jonathan's sheer dumb luck, to coordinate the defeat of a creature whose power is rooted in millennia of belief and dark magic. The ultimate victory feels earned precisely because the cost, emotionally and physically, is so much higher than their first foray into Hamunaptra. They aren't just saving a tomb or a treasure, they are fighting for the continuation of their very unconventional yet fiercely cherished family unit against forces that seek absolute annihilation. The denouement of the confrontation leaves the desert irrevocably scarred, the echoes of ancient battle settling slowly into the sand. Rick, wiping grime, and perhaps a trace of sweat that has little to do with the Egyptian sun, surveys the aftermath. His relief is profound, channeled not into celebration, but into a quiet, almost anxious gathering of his family. For him, success is measured by how quickly they can return to a semblance of normalcy. A life where the most dangerous thing Alex might bring home from school is a bad grade, not a cursed scarab. He looks at Evelyn, whose eyes are slowly clearing of Nefertiti's malice, and there is a silent agreement. They have pushed the boundaries of their shared calling one time too many, perhaps. The thrill is undeniably addictive, a drug only they understand, but the risk to their son is now the ultimate deterrent. Evelyn, shaking off the last vestiges of the ancient queen, feels a strange mixture of exhaustion and intellectual fulfillment. She has not only survived the possession, but has integrated the experience, adding another layer of understanding to the complex tapestry of ancient Egyptian belief systems. Her desire to catalogue and understand remains, yet it is now tempered by a sobriety born from nearly losing herself to the past. She touches the recovered artifacts not with the collector's greed, but with the reverence of someone who has narrowly escaped their deadly embrace. Her mind is already cataloguing the lessons learned, the necessary amendments to future archaeological caution. Amendments Rick knows will likely be ignored the moment another obscure map surfaces. Jonathan, surprisingly unscathed, though perhaps psychologically scarred by his brush with true apocalyptic evil, finds a momentary wave of genuine admiration for his sister and brother-in-law. He has witnessed their unwavering dedication firsthand, and even his cynical heart must concede their heroism. This might translate into a brief period of actual good behavior, perhaps even a responsible investment of his share of any salvageable, non-cursed gold, though the audience, and Rick, remain skeptical. His inherent survival instinct, that marvelous ability to duck just as the ceiling collapses, has once again preserved the comic relief necessary for the next inevitable disaster. Alex, witnessing the final defeat of such overwhelming evil, solidifies his place not just as the son of adventurers, but as a future participant. He doesn't fear the darkness they fought. He sees the challenge it presented and the skill required to overcome it. His childhood is irrevocably intertwined with curses, mummies, and heroic last stands. As they depart the desolate landscape, the unspoken understanding hangs heavy. This was likely the last adventure pursued purely for survival, as the next one will undoubtedly be motivated by the irresistible lure of a history only the O'Connells seem destined to unearth. They fly away from the desert, not just leaving behind the Scorpion King, but leaving behind the illusion that they could ever truly settle down. The departure from Egypt is less a triumphant exit and more a weary extraction. Rick, in the pilot's seat of whatever hastily acquired or commandeered vehicle they utilized for their escape, likely something sturdy and vaguely military in design, looks older, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the stress of protecting not just his wife, but his progeny from forces that defy simple ballistics. His inspiration, perhaps, has always been rooted in the simple, straightforward battles of his past life, making the descent into the mystical all the more taxing. Now, the thought of a sturdy American armchair feels more compelling than any undiscovered pharaoh's treasure. Evelyn gazes out the window, the African landscape blurring beneath them, her gaze distant. The encounter with Nefertiti has left a strange residue, a lingering sense of knowing too much, of having brushed against a power that dwarfed her academic pursuits. Her notebooks, usually filled with meticulous script, now contain hurried sketches of warding symbols and frantic marginalia, evidence of the psychic battle waged within her own mind. She understands, intellectually, that her career as a scholar is now inseparable from her role as a protector, a duality that makes simple archival work impossible. She longs for the quiet certainty of the British Museum, yet knows that certainty has been forever shattered by the reality of ancient Egyptian vengeance. Jonathan is preening, surprisingly unhurt, smoothing down his slightly singed but still ostentatious waistcoat. He's already spinning the tale for an imaginary wealthy audience, likely embellishing his own bravery tenfold. His primary emotion isn't fear of the recent apocalypse, but rather anxiety over whether his latest scheme to secure a priceless relic was properly executed amidst the chaos. He clings to the material rewards of adventure because the existential terror is simply too much to process. Gold is tangible, curses are not. His continued survival is a running joke on the universe, a testament to his ability to simply be in the wrong place at precisely the right moment to avoid annihilation. Alex, nestled between his parents, is vibrating with residual excitement. He clutches a small, smooth stone. Not a cursed artifact, but perhaps a perfectly normal piece of desert quartz he pocketed. He watches his parents, absorbing the unspoken contract reforming between them. They save the world, they return home, they endure the ensuing quiet, and they wait for the next call. For Alex, the world has been perfectly balanced. Great danger met with even greater familial love and competence. He represents the future where the line between historian, warrior, and relic hunter will be utterly blurred. A legacy built upon the foundation of Rick's grit and Evie's intellect. As the plane banks westward, leaving the cradle of civilization and its associated horrors behind, the O'Connells carry with them not just relics, but the indelible proof that their messy, action-packed life is the only life they truly know how to lead. The notion of retirement remains a quaint, utterly unachievable fantasy. The return to civilization, even the slightly scandalous, adventure-funded civilization they inhabit, feels jarringly muted after the sheer decibel level of the Egyptian climax. Rick O'Connell settles back into his role as the reluctant hero with practiced ease, though the quiet moments now carry an undercurrent of hypervigilance. He finds himself examining the sturdy oak beams of their London home, half expecting to see hieroglyphs carved into the wood, or to hear the telltale rattling of ancient bones from the attic. His inspiration, the simple life he craved, has been permanently compromised by the realization that evil, once roused, rarely stays buried unless actively suppressed by someone willing to get very dirty. He views the newspaper headlines praising their anonymous philanthropic efforts with weary amusement. The public craves spectacle but prefers its heroes to remain slightly vague. Evelyn, the intellectual who dared to touch the untouchable, experiences a slow thaw from the cold grip of Nefertiti's influence. Her initial post-adventure energy is spent not on cataloguing finds, but on ensuring Alex's continued safety and normalcy. She might sit late into the night, not reading texts, but simply observing the sleeping boy, a profound gratitude mixed with a chilling awareness of how easily she could have been lost to the darker ambitions channeled through her. Her greatest inspiration now stems from the need to safeguard the next generation from the seductive pull of forbidden knowledge. She attempts to instill in Alex a respect for history that stops short of interaction, a boundary she knows, deep down, neither she nor her son will ultimately be able to maintain. Jonathan, recovering his equilibrium in the comfort of a drawing room far removed from sandstorms, is already engaged in his next endeavour, leveraging his newfound notoriety into better gambling odds and potentially securing a lucrative, if ethically dubious, partnership with a shady antiquities dealer. His emotions are predominantly relief mixed with self-congratulation. He survived, and more importantly, he likely managed to pocket a souvenir that won't immediately turn someone to dust. His career path is a relentless pursuit of the quick score, an escape from the necessity of honest work, and his survival in Egypt serves only to reinforce his belief that divine favor, or at least cosmic carelessness, is on his side. He's the living embodiment of the character who, despite all evidence, believes the rules of survival apply only to other people. Alex, the linchpin of their continuing saga, shows subtle signs of fascination rather than trauma. Where other children might be haunted by nightmares of undead armies, Alex is energized by the mechanics of their defeat. He sketches scenes of the battle, not focusing on the horror, but on the strategy, the leverage point of the artifact, the precise moment the spell broke. He sees his parents not as people who suffered hardship, but as masters of an incredibly high-stakes discipline. This silent observation forms the basis of his character arc. He doesn't fear the heritage, he embraces it, perhaps viewing the occasional world-ending crisis as a mandatory part of growing up in the O'Connell household, a slightly more dramatic version of needing to learn to drive or file taxes. The unspoken truth hovering over their London drawing room is that this was merely an intermission, and the next great mystery is already waiting. Likely tucked away in a dusty library crate, Rick and Evie thought they had safely ignored. The settling dust of London eventually gives way to a subtle, almost imperceptible stirring of unrest once more. Rick finds himself unconsciously checking the security of their estate, the familiar weight of a service weapon now replaced by the mere expectation of trouble. His inspiration shifts from merely being a good father to being a proactive shield. He realizes that escaping history is impossible when history actively seeks you out. He starts taking Alex on more fishing trips, expeditions that are clearly thinly veiled attempts to teach the boy practical survival skills far from the theoretical dangers of books. Rick's gruff exterior softens only when observing Evie and Alex together. A family unit forged in extraordinary fire, a bond stronger than any curse they have faced. He understands that his legacy isn't just surviving the mummy, it's ensuring his family survives the return of every mummy. Evelyn, despite her best efforts to anchor herself in academia, cannot escape the magnetic pull of unsolved puzzles. Her scholarly curiosity has been amplified, not diminished, by her ordeal. She now views every uncatalogued tomb as a potential ticking time bomb. She begins corresponding, discreetly, with fringe historians and dismissed occultists, a step beyond her previous staid research methods. This new intellectual hunger is driven by a need for preparedness. If evil insists on visiting them, she intends to know its precise weaknesses beforehand. She's moved past simply reading history. She's trying to preempt it, a subtle intellectual form of adventuring that keeps her mind sharp while maintaining the facade of domestic tranquility. Jonathan, ever the opportunist, leverages the modest fortune he managed to accrue from the Egyptian misadventure into a series of increasingly questionable business ventures in the burgeoning world of international collecting. He develops a reputation, albeit a whispered one, as someone who shows up when the most dangerous relics are being moved. Though he rarely admits to having done the heavy lifting himself, he manages to avoid true peril by employing teams of disposable, less scrupulous individuals, viewing himself as the essential, charismatic middleman. His primary emotional state is one of calculated risk assessment, punctuated by the recurring, nagging fear that one day Rick and Evie will stop cleaning up his messes, leaving him face to face with a creature far scarier than any mummy, an angry creditor. Alex, now visibly taller and noticeably more adept at lockpicking than any child his age should be, starts experimenting with subtle historical discoveries around the family property. Little tests of ancient mechanisms he finds in forgotten corners of the estate. He watches his parents with an intense, analyzing gaze, mapping their reactions to stress and success. He doesn't just want adventure. He wants mastery over the same forces that have shaped his parents' lives. There is a growing sense that the next discovery won't be stumbled upon by accident, but rather sought out deliberately by the next generation, who has already internalized the thrill of the chase as a necessary part of life. The quiet of London is merely the calm before the inevitable storm, a shared secret kept between the three adventurers awaiting the next compelling whisper from the dust. The quiet, however diligently maintained, is revealed to be an illusion sustained only by distance from the source of conflict. Rick notices the change first in the subtle ways Evelyn interacts with the mail. A certain tension in her fingers as she handles thick, foreign envelopes, a momentary lapse in her otherwise impeccable composure. This suggests that the external world, the world of forgotten tombs and active curses, is beginning to bleed back into their structured life. Rick, whose inspiration has always been anchored in the visceral reality of combat, finds his mind wandering to scenarios where the enemy is not a resurrected king, but a persistent, bureaucratic obstacle threatening their hard-won domesticity, a far more insidious threat to his peace. Evelyn's secret correspondence leads to a specific, unavoidable summons. It is not another king seeking resurrection, but perhaps a misplaced historical document, one so inherently dangerous or politically sensitive that only the O'Connells possess the unique blend of brute force and scholarly expertise required to retrieve it before it falls into the wrong hands. Hands likely belonging to shadowy government agencies or rival collectors who operate with lethal efficiency, lacking the O'Connells' reluctant moral compass. Her emotion is a tight knot of dread and reluctant excitement. The librarian in her demands the document be secured, while the adventurer in her bristles at the idea of another forced departure. Jonathan, sensing the subtle shift in atmosphere, the shared glances, the late-night hushed discussions, begins actively searching for opportunities to attach himself to the impending action. He views the necessity of securing this new, unknown item as a potential profit-sharing venture, subtly positioning himself as the indispensable logistical expert, which usually translates to arranging transport that is wildly unreliable and acquiring supplies that are wildly overpriced. He is driven by the fear of being left behind, not because he fears the danger, but because he fears missing out on the ensuing anecdote and any accompanying material reward. His charm becomes even more finely tuned, a desperate performance aimed at preemptively securing a pardon for any future blunders. Alex, meanwhile, demonstrates a frightening aptitude for independent research. He has bypassed his parents' watchful eyes and begun cross-referencing tangential historical data related to the artifacts they previously encountered. He is driven by an intrinsic need to understand the entire narrative, not just the action sequences. This intellectual pursuit is what truly sets him apart. He doesn't just want to swing the sword, he wants to know why the sword was forged. His budding confidence is visible in the way he carries himself, a small explorer already mapping out the routes of his parents' past escapades in his mind, preparing for the day he will lead the charge, not follow in their wake. The realization dawning on Rick and Evie is stark. They are no longer just protecting their son from the past. They are about to be dragged forward by his ambition to meet the future head-on. The next adventure is not an unwanted intrusion. It is an inevitable succession. The inevitable summons arrives in the form of a coded message delivered by a breathless, clearly terrified courier, confirming Rick's premonitions. It speaks not of curses, but of a stolen codex, an ancient text whose mere existence could destabilize several powerful geopolitical interests, rendering the threats of ancient kings almost quaint by comparison. The location suggested is somewhere remote and politically unstable, a place where the O'Connells' unique blend of archaeological expertise and paramilitary proficiency is desperately needed. Or perhaps where they can be safely dispatched. Rick reacts with a heavy sigh, a sound layered with years of reluctantly accepted responsibility. His inspiration now is purely defensive. Neutralize the threat, secure the object, and get back to the pretense of normalcy before Alex's next school play. He moves immediately into preparation mode, his efficiency a testament to his time in specialized units. Every piece of gear is checked, every contingency planned for, though he knows planning is futile against the whims of destiny and poorly translated ancient texts. He communicates his strategy to Evelyn with clipped, precise instructions, his affection evident only in the fact that he never asks her to stay behind, understanding that her intellect is as vital a weapon as his rifle. Evelyn handles the news with an almost predatory focus. The mention of a codex ignites the scholar within, overriding the mother's apprehension. This isn't just about saving the world, it's about preserving vital, endangered historical truth. She studies the cryptic clues, her fingers flying across maps, the excitement in her eyes momentarily eclipsing the fatigue of her last brush with the supernatural. Her internal conflict is resolved the moment she frames the mission as intellectual preservation. She sees the danger not as a barrier, but as the cost of access to ultimate knowledge, a risk she willingly assumes, much like the young, ambitious researcher who first dared to enter Hamunaptra years ago, unaware of the magnitude of what she was unleashing. Jonathan, having eavesdropped shamelessly, appears with a newly tailored travel bag already packed, mostly with liquor, and small tools designed for discreet reallocation of assets. He pitches his involvement not as a necessity, but as a favour to the world, arguing his experience navigating corrupt port authorities and bribing minor officials is now paramount. He displays a manic optimism, convinced that this codex must be worth a fortune, viewing the geopolitical crisis merely as a complication in the supply chain of wealth. His greatest fear is being stuck in London, while genuine adventure and potential profit happens elsewhere. Alex, far from being relegated to the safety of Aunt Lydia's care, has clearly prepared in his own way. He presents his parents with a laminated, hand-drawn map of the region mentioned in the coded message, cross-referenced with contemporary political boundaries and geological surveys he accessed via Evelyn's unsecured research terminals. He has researched the security protocols of known black market artifact dealers in the region. This demonstration of initiative earns him a rare, brief, genuine smile from Rick and a look of mingled pride and terror from Evie. The unspoken agreement is that this time, Alex will be kept marginally more informed, recognized as an invaluable, if still worrying, asset to the team, solidifying the transfer of guardianship over global peril from one generation to the next. The family prepares for departure, not as reluctant heroes, but as a finely tuned, if entirely self-appointed, historical crisis management unit. The journey to the volatile destination is an education in itself for Alex, who observes his parents' transition from domestic figures back into their roles with analytical intensity. Rick maintains a stoic facade throughout the transit, the landscape outside the window, dusty, conflicted, and overtly dangerous, only serving to focus his military instincts. His quiet inspiration is the image of a peaceful evening tea with his family, a vision he clutches like a talisman against the rising tide of chaos. He uses the travel time not for rest, but for rigorous weapon maintenance, his movements practiced and economical. A stark contrast to Jonathan's loud, theatrical packing and unpacking of various questionable survival garments. Rick's competence acts as the solid, immovable foundation upon which the entire operation rests, a fact Evelyn implicitly trusts. Evelyn, immersed in deciphering ancillary texts related to the codex, texts she somehow managed to procure before they even left London, is operating on pure adrenaline fueled by intellectual curiosity. She views the high-stakes retrieval as the ultimate scholarly challenge, accessing knowledge that powerful factions are willing to kill to control. This pursuit of forbidden knowledge is her core drive, echoing the youthful fervor that sent her digging in forgotten tombs against the advice of established authorities. Yet, there is a new, sharper edge to her focus. She is not just studying history, she is actively fighting to keep it out of the hands of those who would weaponize it, a responsibility she now feels acutely as a mother. Jonathan, naturally, has already managed to form a tentative alliance with a local fixer, a man whose trustworthiness hovers somewhere between a swamp lizard and a politician. He views this new locale as a playground of opportunity, constantly probing for side deals or opportunities to squirrel away a minor, non-essential artifact that might fetch a good price later. His emotional state is a precarious balance between genuine excitement for the chase and the persistent, low-grade panic that he might actually be required to use his wits for something more strenuous than inventing an alibi. He believes his greatest contribution will be his ability to charm his way out of the inevitable diplomatic incident he is guaranteed to cause. Alex, however, is the true emerging force. He isn't just absorbing data, he's predicting contingencies. He points out weaknesses in the courier's route based on recent geopolitical shifts he's researched, and he suggests alternative infiltration points based on forgotten ancient infrastructure mentioned in one of Evelyn's periphery notes. His audacity is not born of arrogance, but of a genuine, fearless belief in his own capacity to contribute. He sees the current crisis not as a danger to be survived, but as a test to prove himself worthy of his lineage. Rick watches his son with a mixture of profound pride and deep-seated terror, recognizing that the boy is not just inheriting their life. He is already beginning to outpace their conventional methods, suggesting that the next adventure might very well be one where the parents are needed only for heavy lifting and moral support. The atmosphere is thick with the realization that the O'Connell family dynamic is evolving into a true, multi-generational expeditionary force. The codex, when they finally track it down, is not guarded by mummies or ancient curses, but by something far more modern and chilling. Highly trained mercenaries operating under the guise of a legitimate archaeological foundation. A testament to how efficiently modern avarice co-opts ancient mythology. Rick's inspiration hardens. This is a tangible enemy, one that understands firearms and strategy, allowing him to fall back into the comfortable rhythm of tactical engagement. He moves through the secured compound with the silent authority of a man who knows exactly where the structural weaknesses lie, his movements economical, every breath measured. He feels a grim satisfaction that this threat can be met with well-placed shots and coordinated maneuvers, rather than reliance on obscure linguistic protections. Evelyn, upon seeing the codex, experiences a wave of almost painful reverence. It is the ultimate historical prize, radiating an almost palpable aura of silenced knowledge. Her immediate response is to analyze the security measures surrounding it, recognizing the modern men as merely pawns protecting a truly valuable asset. Her scholarly drive pushes her to physically touch the binding, seeking the texture of history, but she is pulled back by Rick's firm, unspoken warning. Her brilliance shines as she deciphers the complex, multi-layered security protocols that protect the artifact, a language of lasers and biometric scans that Evelyn translates into strategic vulnerabilities faster than any hacker. She is the intellectual core, proving that the greatest weapon against modern corruption of history is superior knowledge of its origins. Jonathan, predictably, finds himself separated from the main group during an initial skirmish, landing him squarely in the compound's less guarded, but equally dangerous, storage areas. Here, he doesn't find the main codex, but rather a trove of lesser, yet still valuable, ancillary artifacts. Ancient scrolls, jewelry, and small, potentially cursed statuettes. He is driven by pure, unadulterated opportunism, stuffing his pockets with historical footnotes that might buy him a very nice villa in the Mediterranean. His bumbling movements accidentally trigger a secondary alarm, inadvertently saving the team from a flanking maneuver by drawing the mercenaries' attention toward the sound of clattering pots and Jonathan's high-pitched curses. Alex, proving his worth beyond mere research, has utilized his intimate knowledge of the compound's schematics, gleaned from his mother's discarded preliminary briefings, to establish a secure, alternative extraction route. He coordinates with Rick via a scrambled comms unit, his voice calm and clear, directing his father past unexpected laser grids and pressure plates. He embodies the synthesis of his parents' careers. The historian's understanding of the terrain applied with the soldier's tactical precision. His quiet competence is a source of constant, nervous pride for Evelyn. He is succeeding where she once only dreamed of succeeding, yet he is doing it with the casual confidence of someone who never doubted the outcome. The retrieval is messy, involving more gunfire than footnotes, but the codex is secured. A victory hard won through the synergistic application of military grit, esoteric knowledge, and unexpected filial genius. The extraction is less a clean getaway and more a desperate scramble through a labyrinth designed for maximum lethal efficiency. Rick, adrenaline singing a familiar, dangerous tune in his veins, shields Evelyn and Alex as they move toward Alex's pre-planned escape route. The mercenaries, realizing they've been outmaneuvered not by superior firepower, but by superior lateral thinking, unleash a furious, localized assault. Rick's focus narrows to an almost unbearable intensity. Every shadow could hide a threat, every loud noise a diversion. His deep-seated loyalty manifests not as recklessness, but as meticulous control over the immediate environment. He is the eye of the hurricane, ensuring his family orbits him safely. Evelyn clutches the secured codex tightly against her chest, its ancient parchment feeling warm, almost feverish, against her protective outerwear. The physical danger heightens her academic urgency. She steals glances at the script visible through the protective casing, recognizing linguistic patterns that suggest the codex contains not just history, but perhaps even the key to controlling the very entities they have battled before. This realization sharpens her determination. She refuses to be merely the rescuer. She must be the translator, the one who truly understands the power they have risked everything to retrieve. The near miss with the mercenaries solidifies her resolve. Knowledge cannot be left to those who only see monetary or military value. Jonathan emerges from the storage wing in a cloud of dust, his expression a mixture of terrified exhilaration and petty triumph. He hasn't just escaped, he has managed to snag a few small, undeniably genuine gold funerary masks, which he has haphazardly tucked inside his jacket, causing an awkward, lopsided silhouette. He uses his terror as fuel, stumbling wildly into the path of a pursuing mercenary, the impact sending both man and gold flying. Jonathan's role is the chaotic variable, the unpredictable element that throws off the enemy's perfectly organized pursuit. His deep-seated motivation remains simple: avoid dying broke, and ensure the story of his survival is suitably embellished for future telling. Alex, guiding them through a hidden drainage tunnel he identified from historical surveyors' maps, exhibits a maturity that unnerves his parents. He navigates the darkness with an almost instinctual grace, his small flashlight beam unwavering. He offers tactical advice regarding the mercenaries' expected entry points, using terminology he's gleaned from years of listening to his father's war stories and his mother's strategic analyses. His emotion is a quiet, focused sense of belonging. This is the only world where his specific set of skills makes perfect, undeniable sense. As they finally breach the surface in a relatively safe, secluded area, the look he gives Rick is not one of admiration for a hero, but of partnership with a worthy commander. The true victory is the codex secured, but the deeper, more complex victory is the realization that the next generation is not only ready to fight alongside them, but is already innovating new ways to win. The sheer ambition of The Mummy Returns, stepping out from the considerable shadow cast by the surprisingly successful 1999 predecessor, reveals a film grappling with the perils of franchise expansion. It is less a sequel and more an escalation, amplifying every element. The scope of the supernatural threat, the scale of the set pieces, and the sheer volume of CGI that defines its midsection. Brendan Fraser, returning as Rick O'Connell, remains the effortlessly charming action hero, a man whose every strained effort feels genuine, grounding the increasingly outlandish plot mechanics in a relatable, slightly weary heroism. His chemistry with Rachel Weisz's Evie Carnahan is the film's persistent anchor. Weisz, building upon her Oscar-nominated turn in The Mummy and subsequent roles showcasing sharp intellect alongside dramatic depth, portrays Evie's archaeological enthusiasm as both a strength and a dangerous liability. The narrative thrust pivots around the reawakening of the Scorpion King, portrayed through motion capture by Dwayne Johnson in his first major cinematic role. This moment marks a significant transition for Johnson, whose charisma, even then, suggests a star wattage capable of carrying future blockbusters, though the raw, sometimes unrefined nature of the CGI representation of his character leaves something to be desired in terms of integration with the live action. The film consciously elevates the stakes by introducing a more formidable mystical enemy in Imhotep, brought back with even greater intensity by Arnold Vosloo. Vosloo plays the villain with a commitment to theatrical malice that prevents the often convoluted plot from collapsing entirely under its own weight, understanding that pulp adventure requires unwavering commitment to melodrama. The visual aesthetic is noticeably louder than the first film, where 1999 blended historical adventure with gothic horror elements. The Mummy Returns leans heavily into high fantasy and digital spectacle. This is most evident in the extended sequences involving the Army of the Dead and the confrontation in the city of Akhmen-Ra. Director Stephen Sommers, whose career has always favoured maximalist energy, seen earlier in his work on Deep Rising and Van Helsing, pushes the limits of contemporary digital effects technology. While groundbreaking for the time, many of these sequences now betray their age, feeling weightless when compared to the tactile, practical effects that anchored the original's set pieces. The introduction of Alex, the O'Connell's son, played competently by Freddie Both, serves a clear narrative purpose: to give the adventure a generational stake and provide a catalyst for Evie's kidnapping. However, this addition also occasionally slows the momentum, forcing expositional detours into the familial dynamic that momentarily distract from the immediate pursuit. John Hannah's return as Jonathan, providing much-needed comic relief, retains its effectiveness, his avarice and cowardice acting as the perfect foil to Rick's straightforward bravery. Ultimately, The Mummy Returns functions best as pure, unadulterated summer spectacle. It understands its lineage in adventure serials and Edgar Rice Burroughs' pulp, opting for relentless pacing over nuanced storytelling. It is a film that chooses scope over restraint, sacrificing some of the grounded charm of its predecessor for a much grander, if sometimes cluttered, canvas of tombs, battles, and mythical beasts. The result is an entertaining, if overstuffed, testament to early 2000s blockbuster filmmaking, where the ambition to build a cinematic universe often outpaced the requirement for narrative economy. The film's commitment to more is palpable in every frame, often resulting in a sense of delightful, chaotic overload. Fraser's Rick, despite the narrative constantly throwing him into increasingly unbelievable scenarios, rescuing his wife, protecting his son, fighting an undead army, never quite loses that essential, slightly bewildered quality of a former soldier stumbling into a mythological arms race. He is the audience surrogate, grounded by his skepticism even as he participates in aerial chariot races across the desert, a sequence that perfectly encapsulates the film's ethos. If you can imagine it, we will put it on screen. Consequences be damned. Weiss's Evie, transitioning from dusty academic to reluctant action heroine, often appears almost overwhelmed by the sheer power she unwittingly wields. Her connection to the Book of the Dead, which dictates much of the supernatural activity, deepens her role beyond mere damsel in distress. She is the intellectual key to the antagonist's power. This contrasts sharply with the physical introduction of Dwayne Johnson as the Scorpion King. Johnson, stepping onto the screen not just as a wrestler, but as a nascent movie star, embodies raw, untamed physical power. The CGI choice for his transformation and later battle sequences, however, serves as an early indicator of the visual pitfalls awaiting massive digital undertakings. The texture and weight feel curiously absent, a digitized stand-in rather than a physical presence dominating the frame as Johnson himself would later master. Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep, conversely, benefits from his continued physical presence. His desire for power is now laced with a possessiveness over Evie, elevating his villainy beyond mere resurrection into something approaching a bizarre, obsessive romance played out against armies of the dead. He understands the inherent theatricality required to command attention in such a sprawling epic. His movements are precise, his pronouncements laced with doom, ensuring that even when the plot mechanics tangle themselves, the central evil remains visibly motivated. The dynamic between the protagonists is enriched by the presence of Alex, whose capture functions as the emotional lever. This forces Rick and Evie into a more desperate, protective mode, which brings out the genuine warmth in their partnership that the first film established so well. Jonathan, bless his perpetually panicked heart, serves as the necessary comic relief valve. His reactions, usually rooted in a desire to save his own skin or acquire a treasure, are exaggerated perfectly to cut the tension built up by the looming supernatural threats. His inclusion prevents the relentless action from becoming emotionally monolithic. What remains fascinating in retrospect is how The Mummy Returns attempts to balance homage with innovation. It clearly revels in the adventure serial tradition, the chase sequences, the ticking clocks, the near misses. But it leverages the newfound digital power to make those sequences bigger than anything serial cinema could have afforded. Summers doesn't aim for subtlety. He aims for exhilaration. The shift toward the fantastical, particularly the introduction of Egyptian gods and mythological battles, signals a clear pivot toward a franchise blueprint designed to compete with the burgeoning superhero epics. It's a film that wears its excesses proudly, offering a giddy, exhausting ride that proves that sometimes the most engaging blockbuster is one that refuses to sit still long enough for you to question its logic. The emotional core, surprisingly intact despite the film's sprawling ambition, resides almost entirely within the familial unit forged by Rick and Evie. Rick's transition from carefree adventurer to fiercely protective father is subtly portrayed by Fraser through a slight hardening around the eyes and an almost weary impatience with the supernatural nonsense that perpetually plagues their lives. He doesn't enjoy the chaos anymore. He endures it for his family. Evie, meanwhile, struggles visibly with the legacy of her discoveries. The ancient forces she once studied with academic glee are now actively trying to destroy her loved ones. This internal conflict, The thrill of knowledge versus the terror of its consequences lends a necessary gravitas to her moments of crisis, particularly when she is manipulated by Imhotep's lingering influence. The visual excesses, while dating the film in certain digital aspects, are nonetheless integral to the characters' arcs. The sheer scale of the challenges, from escaping the clutches of the Medjay warriors to navigating the labyrinthine interior of the pyramid, forces the ensemble to operate at peak capacity. The interactions between the characters feel organic because they are reacting to immediate, overwhelming threats, not merely reacting to plot points. John Hannah's Jonathan, whose primary motivation remains self-preservation and occasional opportunistic thievery, provides the necessary humanizing contrast to the godly scale of the conflict. His banter with Rick, steeped in the comfortable familiarity of long-shared trauma, is the film's most reliable source of genuine levity, acting as a pressure release valve before the next wave of CGI spectacle breaks over the audience. Dwayne Johnson's presence, even filtered through the less-than-perfect early 2000s visual effects, is undeniably magnetic. The mythology surrounding the Scorpion King demands an imposing physical figure, and Johnson delivers that imposing stature. His segments serve as a deliberate waypoint toward building out a larger mythology, an obvious attempt to establish an equivalent power center to Imhotep for future installments. While the execution falters slightly in the integration of his large form into the desert vistas, the intent is clear: to plant the seeds of a cinematic universe where established mythological figures can seamlessly join the O'Connells' adventures. Ultimately, the film succeeds not in its flawless execution. The CGI frequently buckles under the weight of expectation, but in its sheer, unadulterated enthusiasm for adventure. It's a story that fully commits to the idea that heroes, even when faced with armies of the damned, should remain fundamentally decent, slightly overwhelmed, and deeply committed to saving the people they love. Summers directs with an aggressive, almost frantic energy, ensuring that the audience is too busy enjoying the ride to deeply scrutinize the occasional narrative leap of faith. It is an exhilarating, if sometimes exhausting, piece of populist filmmaking that chose to double down on everything that made the first film work, even if it meant sacrificing some of the tighter storytelling for broader strokes of spectacle. The film's dedication to myth-making extends beyond its principal antagonists, weaving a tapestry of secondary threats and supporting figures designed to keep the momentum relentlessly forward. We see this in the introduction of the fanatical cultists who shepherd the reborn Imhotep, men whose blind devotion provides a human face to the ancient evil's resurgence. They are disposable, yet necessary components of the larger mechanism of doom, reflecting the serial tradition where henchmen existed primarily to facilitate the hero's escape or capture. This structural necessity sometimes leads to thinly sketched characterizations, where immediate plot function supersedes deeper exploration. The practicalities of Evie's involvement as the holder of immense spiritual power often rely on moments of cinematic shorthand. Her sudden command over ancient runes and her capacity to channel spiritual energy are moments where the film relies heavily on Wise's innate intelligence to sell the transformation from librarian to living artifact. This contrasts sharply with the grounded military competence Rick maintains, a skill set honed in real-world conflicts that now seems comically inadequate against a mummy commanding the forces of the underworld. Fraser masterfully plays Rick's increasing bewilderment. He is a man whose battlefield training offers no syllabus for dealing with amphibious mummies or colossal scorpions. Furthermore, the film's middle section, dominated by the pursuit through the lush, almost hallucinatory landscapes leading toward the pyramid, showcases Stephen Sommers' flair for creating vibrant, albeit transient worlds. These environments, the dense jungle, the bustling market squares filled with panicked extras, function less as authentic locations and more as elaborate stages designed solely for the next major action sequence. The emotional undercurrent of fear is constantly present. primarily channeled through the supporting cast who react with appropriate terror to the unfolding apocalypse, thereby validating the scale of the threat for the audience. Jonathan, naturally, provides the most entertaining reaction, viewing every perilous situation primarily through the lens of potential inheritance or immediate danger to his person, solidifying his role as the perpetually self-interested comedic counterpoint to Rick's selfless heroism. The success of this chaotic spectacle lies in its refusal to slow down long enough for the audience to feel the narrative inconsistencies, favoring kinetic energy over narrative neatness. The commitment to relentless forward motion often necessitated the introduction of figures who served purely to accelerate the plot or offer brief moments of exposition regarding the escalating magical dangers. This is perhaps most evident in the way the film handles the ancient lore surrounding the Scorpion King and the separation of his soul from his physical form. The narrative demands a means for Rick and Evie to understand exactly how to thwart a figure of such immense, godlike power. And this often falls to the most knowledgeable, which, inevitably, is Evie, despite the inherent risk to her sanity and safety. Her scholarly drive is presented as both her greatest asset and her most significant vulnerability, a dynamic that adds a layer of intellectual tension often missing in pure action spectacles. Rick O'Connell, conversely, remains refreshingly unconcerned with the intricacies of ancient Egyptian theological philosophy. His performance, always imbued with a wry self-awareness, suggests a man whose primary response to divine intervention is a deep sigh followed by the acquisition of a significantly larger weapon. Fraser's portrayal skillfully communicates the exhaustion of a man who thought he had settled down only to discover his domestic life now requires regular battles against the damned. This weariness is crucial. It prevents the escalating fantasy elements from feeling completely weightless, grounding the fantastical stakes in the very real desire of one man to return to his wife and son intact. The familial dynamic, central to the sequel's added emotional weight, is constantly tested by the demands of the adventure. Alex, the young catalyst, is less a fully developed character and more a symbol of everything the O'Connells are fighting to preserve. His capture functions as the ultimate narrative push, forcing Rick and Evie into areas of the plot where their individual skills are tested to their absolute limits. The moments where Rick and Evie must communicate their love and commitment under extreme duress, usually while dangling precariously over a chasm filled with undead minions, are where the sequel finds its most genuine, if brief, emotional resonance, reaffirming the domestic foundation beneath the crumbling temples. John Hannah's Jonathan, in his perpetual state of flustered panic, remains the essential buffer between the film's high-stakes supernatural conflict and outright melodrama. His concern for his own comfort and wealth serves as a perfect, humorous counterpoint to the existential threats faced by the rest of the crew. His cowardice, when juxtaposed with Rick's steadfast bravery, highlights the different forms heroism can take. Some fight gods, others simply try to stay out of the way of the ensuing carnage, often providing the most relatable human reaction available. The film, despite its visual bombast, is deeply invested in this core group surviving intact, a characteristic inherited from the adventure heroes of pulp fiction it so clearly seeks to emulate. The visual cacophony, a deliberate choice by Summers, often serves to mask the structural reliance on established tropes of the adventure genre. The sequence involving the retrieval of Anubis's spear, for instance, is a masterpiece of kinetic staging, designed less around geographical logic and more around a series of escalating physical obstacles that force the characters into immediate collaboration. Evie's growing comfort with her mystical lineage is paralleled by Rick's pragmatic reliance on overwhelming firepower, a neat division of labor that simplifies the complex supernatural mechanics into manageable action beats. This dichotomy, brains versus brawn, magic versus machine guns, is the engine of the O'Connell dynamic. Dwayne Johnson's early foray into serious blockbuster territory as the Scorpion King showcases a commanding physical presence that even the early digital layering cannot entirely obscure. His character is pure mythological force, a deliberate escalation from Imhotep's vengeful sorcery to elemental biblical power. The narrative frames the confrontation not just as a fight for survival, but as a crucial establishment of cinematic territory. This is the world where ancient gods and demigods exist, and the O'Connells are now firmly in their orbit. Johnson's charisma, though sometimes awkwardly integrated into the CGI-heavy environment, hints at the future leading man, projecting an almost unshakable confidence that even the undead armies cannot truly diminish. Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep benefits from the sequel's willingness to grant him even greater, more theatrical motivations. His obsession with Evie evolves from a desire to possess the woman who understands his secrets to a projection of his own eternal ambition. Vosloo plays this with a palpable relish, understanding that to maintain menace against a backdrop of giant spiders and charging chariots, the villain must possess an almost operatic self-seriousness. He is the perfect foil for the O'Connells' grounded, slightly exasperated heroism, providing the necessary arch-menace that anchors the fantastic proceedings. Even the film's pacing, frenetic to the point of exhaustion, speaks volumes about the filmmaker's confidence in the material's inherent entertainment value. There is rarely a moment given over to quiet introspection. The narrative is constantly spurred forward by a new artifact, a new betrayal, or a fresh wave of supernatural infantry. This relentless energy is what keeps Jonathan's antics from becoming tiresome. His buffoonery is timed perfectly to break the tension before the next major set piece overwhelms the senses. In essence, The Mummy Returns is a cinematic sugar rush, a film that knows precisely what its audience craves: more action, bigger monsters, and more of the chemistry between its leads, and delivers it with a confident, almost reckless abandon. The commitment to scale in The Mummy Returns often required the narrative to employ convenient magical solutions for problems it had meticulously constructed. For instance, the rapid acquisition of specialized knowledge or the instantaneous travel across vast desert tracts speaks to a narrative prioritizing spectacle continuity over grounded realism. Evie, often the reluctant recipient of ancient mystical burdens, embodies this tension between the educated scholar and the unwitting sorceress. Weiss imbues her moments of magical realization with genuine apprehension, contrasting sharply with the eagerness she displayed for discovery in the previous installment. Now, knowledge carries a tangible, immediate threat to her family's existence. Rick's role in these escalating magical scenarios remains wonderfully pragmatic. He is the ultimate man of action, forced to function in a world saturated with the inexplicable. Fraser portrays this fatigue beautifully. His sighs and exasperated glances when confronted with yet another mythological creature confirm that he remains, at heart, a simple soldier utterly overwhelmed by the Egyptian pantheon, deciding to stage a comeback tour. His unwavering focus on protecting Evie and Alex is the simple, sturdy thread holding the ornate tapestry of fantasy together. He doesn't need to understand the mechanics of the supernatural. He only needs to know how to neutralize the immediate threat to his wife. The emotional weight lent by Alex's presence ensures that the stakes are perpetually personal, a departure from the grand, impersonal stakes of simple treasure hunting. This familial pressure forces Rick and Evie to operate outside their comfort zones, pushing Evie further into the arcane and Rick further into desperate, large-scale engagements. This synergy is what makes the core duo compelling. They are a self-sufficient unit facing down ancient gods, relying on their established trust when all other logic fails. Jonathan, naturally, continues to serve as the audience's voice of self-interest, offering necessary comic deflation. His reactions to impending doom, usually involving calculating the best escape route or bemoaning the lack of comfortable accommodations, serve to remind the viewer that amidst the armies of the dead, human greed and petty anxieties persist. His presence prevents the film from dissolving entirely into heavy mythological earnestness, providing those crucial moments of levity that allow the audience to reset before the next massive digital wave breaks. The film's ultimate success lies in its understanding that audiences returning for a sequel crave amplification, not revision. They want the charm of the first film, but bigger and louder. The introduction of the Scorpion King, while visually ambitious, functions chiefly as a benchmark for the scale of power that can now be summoned, signaling a move toward a universe where the O'Connells are not merely stumbling upon ancient mysteries, but actively engaging with foundational forces of that world. It is a blockbuster designed for maximum velocity, where narrative logic is willingly sacrificed at the altar of exhilarating, large-scale adventure filmmaking. The landscape of supporting characters, while functionally necessary for moving the vast apparatus of the plot, often relies on broad strokes to keep pace with the frenetic energy of the main cast. The Magi warriors, who reappear here as guardians and allies, represent a necessary grounding element, a connection to the traditions and geography that the O'Connells are constantly disrupting. Their stoic loyalty contrasts with the O'Connells' more chaotic brand of adventuring, suggesting a more organized resistance to the supernatural upheaval that the protagonists inadvertently unleash. However, their character development remains secondary to their utility in large-scale combat choreography, serving mainly as reliable backup when Rick's personal arsenal proves insufficient against a horde of reanimated corpses. The very structure of the quest, demanding the simultaneous pursuit of the Spear of Horus and the protection of Alex, forces the narrative into multiple, often simultaneous, high-stakes scenarios. This fragmentation is both a strength, ensuring continuous action, and a weakness, as it denies extended emotional development for any single conflict. Evie's journey into channeling ancient power, while visually arresting, is resolved so swiftly once the spear is in hand that the implications of her temporary divinity feel underexplored. It's a mechanism to empower her for the final confrontation, rather than a deep dive into the psychological toll of wielding such raw energy, which is a common concession made when translating sprawling mythology into a 2-hour action format. In this pursuit of maximalist entertainment, the film treats its mythology like a boundless playground. The sheer variety of creatures and settings, from the oppressive heat of the desert tomb to the damp claustrophobic confines of the submerged ruins, suggests a production design budget heavily invested in creating distinct visual arenas for conflict. This visual generosity keeps the audience engaged even when dialogue or character motivation flags. The film is constantly showing rather than telling, using the spectacle itself as the primary language of storytelling, a legacy inherited from the grand spectacle cinema of previous decades that Stephen Sommers clearly admires. Ultimately, The Mummy Returns is an exercise in escalating known quantities. It takes the established formula, Rick's heroism, Evie's intellect, Jonathan's commentary, Imhotep's malice, and pumps the volume, effectively drowning out any quieter moments that might have allowed for deeper thematic exploration. It is a deeply satisfying sugar high for fans of the original, a film that understands that in the realm of summer blockbusters, sometimes the most honest approach is to simply give the audience everything they asked for, and then a little bit more, regardless of whether it all fits together perfectly. The film's pervasive reliance on spectacle occasionally strains the believability of its world, even within the established framework of Egyptian fantasy. Rick's ability to acquire military-grade weaponry and transport large teams across remote Egyptian terrain with apparent ease speaks to a narrative shorthand where logistical realism is entirely subservient to the next planned explosion or chase scene. Fraser sells this implausibility through sheer force of charisma. He carries the weight of these logical leaps with a slightly raised eyebrow and a weary dedication that implies, yes, this is insane, but someone has to stop them. This undercurrent of self-awareness is vital to keeping the audience tethered to the O'Connell family unit amidst the chaos. Evie's intellectual contributions, while essential, are often framed as dangerous liabilities rather than consistent strengths. A trope common when positioning a female lead in an action-heavy role. Her knowledge activates the plot, but her vulnerability to spiritual influence necessitates constant rescue by Rick, reinforcing a familiar dynamic despite her demonstrated competence in earlier scenes. Vice manages to maintain Evie's agency primarily through stubbornness and sheer force of will when she is not actively channeling ancient forces. She fights to remain the master of her own discoveries, even as those discoveries attempt to consume her. The final act's culmination, centered around the duel between the Scorpion King and Imhotep, feels deliberately oversized, a clear signal that the franchise is aiming for an epic confrontation scale comparable to mythological epics, moving far beyond the confined, tomb-raiding atmosphere of the first film. This confrontation, however, also highlights the reliance on digital creations over tangible threats. While the visual iconography of the Scorpion King is powerful, the execution leaves an emotional gap. The audience responds more viscerally to the threat of Imhotep physically tormenting Evie than to the large-scale digital clash of mythological figures. Jonathan's moments of accidental heroism, usually achieved through sheer luck or running in the opposite direction of danger, remain highly effective comedic punctuation marks. His utter lack of concern for the grand metaphysical battle, focusing instead on surviving the next 5 minutes, or perhaps locating a misplaced piece of jewelry, acts as a necessary deflation of the surrounding drama. He reminds the viewer that these larger-than-life events are still being experienced by deeply flawed, fundamentally ordinary people, albeit ordinary people who possess improbable luck. The film, for all its high fantasy aspirations, thrives on the friction between the mundane human reactions of its core trio and the unbelievable powers arrayed against them. The film's relentless forward momentum often leads to a sense of narrative compression, especially concerning the emotional aftermath of supernatural encounters. For instance, the sheer terror Evie experiences after being temporarily possessed or facing down monstrous manifestations is quickly smoothed over by the immediate demand for the next chase sequence. This rapid emotional resetting is a hallmark of this particular brand of hyperkinetic blockbuster, prioritizing the continuation of the thrill ride over deep character processing. Fraser's Rick seems almost immune to the psychological toll, his response being a practiced, slightly tired determination to simply put one foot in front of the other until the mummy is finally banished again. The introduction of Alex, while intended to raise the personal stakes, also serves to reframe the dynamic between Rick and Evie into one of parental concern, adding a layer of domestic anxiety to their existing romantic partnership. Freddie Both's performance, while adequate for the role of the endangered child, is largely defined by his need to be rescued, making him less an active participant in the adventure and more a precious object to be guarded. This necessity draws out the moments of genuine, unguarded affection between Rick and Evie, their silent understandings across a battlefield, their shared frustration with Jonathan's antics, which are the true, lasting appeal of the franchise. Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep, given a second major outing, is tasked with embodying a more complex villainy. Not just a lust for power, but a twisted, almost paternalistic claim over Evie, fueled by her inherent connection to ancient Egyptian royalty. Vosloo plays this with a magnificent, brooding intensity, making his moments of focused malice feel earned amidst the sprawling chaos surrounding him. He is the classical, theatrical antagonist, demanding that the spectacle serve his personal vendetta. Where the film truly revels in excess is in the logistical absurdity of the climax. The concept of an army rising from the sand, coupled with the introduction of the Scorpion King's ultimate power, pushes the boundaries of even the established fantasy rules. This maximalist approach requires the audience to suspend disbelief almost entirely, rewarding dedication to the spectacle itself. It is an undeniably entertaining chaos, a direct lineage from the high-octane adventure serials, yet filtered through the burgeoning digital palette of the early millennium, creating a viewing experience that is both exhilaratingly loud and occasionally hollow at its center. The film ultimately trusts its star power and its visual ambition to carry the day, and for the most part, it succeeds in delivering a memorable, if overstuffed, cinematic sugar rush. The sheer density of mythological elements introduced in the latter half of the film necessitates a certain narrative generosity toward implausibility. The film, much like its predecessor, operates on the logic that if a piece of ancient Egyptian lore sounds sufficiently impressive, it must be integrated, regardless of how many new rules it imposes on the established universe. This results in a feeling of narrative breadth over narrative depth. We are given sweeping visions of the mythological underworld and divine conflicts, but the actual process of navigating these dangers is often reduced to a quick puzzle solved by Evie, or a sudden surge of power manifested by a protagonist. It's an architecture built for mounting spectacle rather than sustained thematic coherence. Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell continues to anchor the madness with his world-weary charm. He is the quintessential reluctant hero whose personal investment, his family, is the only motivation he truly needs to confront literal deities. His chemistry with Rachel Weisz is the film's undeniable currency. They function as a highly capable, albeit often bewildered married team, where Evie provides the historical context and Rick provides the necessary blunt force trauma solution. This dynamic is what audiences crave. A partnership forged in chaos that remains fundamentally loving, despite the constant threat of being devoured by sand demons or mummified by vengeful priests. The physical introduction of Dwayne Johnson, even constrained by the motion capture technology of the time, signifies a clear strategic move by the studio to future-proof the franchise. The Scorpion King represents not just a powerful enemy, but an entire sub-franchise opportunity. A clear appeal to the action audience seeking pure, untamed physical confrontation that contrasts with Imhotep's more cerebral, magical menace. While the visual integration is sometimes jarring, the inherent star quality projected by Johnson suggests a powerful new pillar for this cinematic world, a mythological heavyweight ready to carry the torch of brute force adventure. Arnold Vosloo, conversely, benefits from the script granting Imhotep a more personal stake. His obsession with Evie becomes a perverse form of possessiveness rooted in ancient history, elevating his villainy beyond simple world domination. Vosloo commits fully to this elevated melodrama, ensuring that even when the plot machinery grinds under the weight of its own set pieces, the villain's motivation remains clearly visible, a theatrical beacon of self-serving ancient evil. Jonathan, meanwhile, continues his vital role as the cynical, self-preserving counterweight, his comedic anxiety offering necessary oxygen to the increasingly breathless plot. The film, in its entirety, is a testament to populist filmmaking that prioritizes exhilarating sensory overload over nuanced character journeys, betting heavily on the established charisma of its returning leads to sustain its considerable, if somewhat sprawling, ambitions. The film's chaotic energy is meticulously orchestrated, designed to disguise the fact that the O'Connell family frequently stumbles into solutions rather than systematically achieving them through superior planning. This haphazard success is part of their charm, exemplified by moments where Jonathan, in a panic, accidentally triggers a mechanism that benefits Rick and Evie, or where a poorly aimed weapon disables a seemingly insurmountable threat. This element of luck woven into their bravery reinforces their relatability. They are not invincible demigods, but resourceful survivors who often benefit from the universe's bizarre sense of humor regarding their plight. Evie's ongoing struggle with the mystical is often highlighted by moments of genuine, wide-eyed fear that cut through the action bravado. When she successfully deciphers a crucial text, there's a brief flash of the eager academic, but it's quickly eclipsed by the sheer terror of realizing the immediate, physical consequence of that knowledge on the world around her. Weiss portrays this duality brilliantly. The joy of understanding ancient secrets warring with the horror of unleashing them upon her husband and son. This internal conflict gives her character depth that the purely magical antagonists often lack. The vastness of the final battle sequences, pitting the heroes against the legions of the undead and the towering presence of the Scorpion King, serves to dwarf the protagonists, emphasizing the sheer improbability of their survival. Rick, positioned amidst this apocalyptic tableau, often resorts to a kind of stubborn, animalistic defense of his family. Fraser's performance here transcends mere action heroics. It becomes the performance of a father operating on pure adrenaline and commitment, his focus narrowed entirely onto extraction and protection, finding a profound, simple heroism amidst the epic confusion. What holds the disparate elements together is the genuine, lived-in rapport between Rick and Evie. Their arguments, their mutual exasperation with Jonathan, and their instinctive reliance on one another in moments of crisis speak to a relationship forged under extreme duress, a true partnership. This warmth provides the necessary emotional ballast when the CGI environments become too abstract or the mythology too convoluted. The film is, at its heart, an extremely expensive and explosive love story, wrapped in the guise of an adventure epic, proving that spectacle, when anchored by recognizable, flawed human affection, retains its magnetic pull, even when it threatens to collapse under the weight of its own overwhelming ambition. The film's dedication to escalating the stakes meant that the supporting cast often served as narrative speed bumps or necessary exposition dumps, their individual concerns quickly swept aside by the next cataclysmic event. Take, for instance, the recurring presence of the Magi under the command of hardy Greaves, who, despite their fierce loyalty, function largely as a beautifully costumed cavalry charge. Their honor-bound commitment to protecting the O'Connells acts as a convenient plot device to manage large-scale threats that would otherwise require Rick to utilize impossible military strategies single-handedly. Their stoicism serves as a silent rebuke to Jonathan's inherent selfishness, embodying the pure dedication to duty that the O'Connells often struggle to maintain amidst the chaos. Evie's intellectual prowess is continually leveraged, but almost always at great personal risk, reinforcing a subtle narrative irony. The more she learns, the more actively the ancient world targets her lineage and loved ones. This vulnerability is played up dramatically during scenes where Imhotep attempts to corrupt her through proximity or suggestion. Weiss masterfully conveys the sheer mental strain, a fleeting look of ancient allure crossing her face before she forcibly snaps back to the present terror, usually catalyzed by a sharp, grounding word from Rick. This internal battle between the allure of forbidden knowledge and the terror of familial consequence is the sequence's most poignant drama. The ultimate payoff, the confrontation involving the Spear of Horus and the subsequent arrival of the Scorpion King, is a masterclass in visual overload, a deliberate sensory assault designed to overwhelm analytical thought. The merging of mythological entities feels less like logical storytelling progression and more like a wrestling match between two titans, where the audience is simply there to witness the power on display. Johnson's imposing physical presence is meant to convey unstoppable force, yet the emotional resonance is surprisingly muted because the audience is rarely given a moment to connect with his plight outside of his mythic destiny. He is power incarnate, lacking the relatable flaws of Imhotep or the O'Connells. Ultimately, the film succeeds by relying heavily on the inherited goodwill of the first installment, applying an industrial-strength dose of adrenaline to every conceivable element. The relationship between Rick and Evie, constantly tested by curses, mummies, and near-fatal environmental hazards, remains the emotional anchor. Fraser and Weiss communicate a deep, enduring partnership built on mutual respect for their wildly different skill sets, making their desperate efforts to save their son feel profoundly earned. The resulting movie is a wildly enthusiastic, sometimes messy explosion of adventure, perfectly calibrated to satisfy the appetite for escalating spectacle, even if it means the narrative threads become hopelessly tangled in the process. The film's finale, in its relentless pursuit of the biggest possible confrontation, ironically demands the greatest narrative leaps of faith regarding the O'Connells' immediate safety and efficacy. When faced with the massive unified armies of the dead and the sheer godlike strength of the Scorpion King, the solutions Rick and Evie employ feel less like clever tactics and more like plot mandates delivered by the screenplay gods. Rick's reliance on conventional military hardware feels almost quaint against mythological forces. Yet Fraser plays this incompetence with such sincere, gritting determination that it works as underdog heroism. He is simply refusing to surrender his ground, regardless of the enemy's statistical advantage. Evie's mastery over the mystical artifact becomes a momentary deus ex machina, designed to balance the scales instantly against the overwhelming power of the Scorpion King. While visually exciting, the speed with which she embraces her role as a conduit for ancient power underscores the film's tendency to deploy character development only when it directly facilitates the next set piece. Her transformation is less about internal growth and more about acquiring the necessary key to unlock the next level of the action game, a narrative shortcut that keeps the momentum from stalling for character reflection. Jonathan, in his final contribution, manages to embody the spirit of pure, chaotic opportunism. His involvement in the decisive moments often seems accidental, a byproduct of his self-serving attempts to flee or hoard treasure. Yet these mishaps invariably contribute to the villain's downfall. Hannah plays this cowardice with such charming relish that it transforms into its own form of flawed heroism. He is the necessary chaotic element that disrupts the pristine, doom-laden symmetry of the supernatural conflict. His presence is a constant reminder that even when battling the forces of creation and destruction, human greed remains a reliable, if often clumsy, engine of narrative change. Ultimately, The Mummy Returns concludes not with a neat tying up of loose ends, but with a massive, glorious bang, ensuring that the world is suitably shaken and the O'Connells are firmly established as reluctant custodians of global supernatural stability. The film leaves the audience breathless, convinced that while the logistics may have been absurd, the sheer force of the lead's chemistry and the filmmaker's enthusiasm for maximalist adventure were more than enough to paper over the cracks in its elaborate, fantastical structure. It is a sequel that trades subtlety for scale, delivering a dizzying, immensely entertaining experience built on the foundation of what the audience already loved, just dialed up to 11. Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the Q-Man channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie The Mummy Returns from 2001. The familiar dust motes dance in the golden light, spilling into a surprisingly cozy London townhouse, a testament to the success that followed the rather tumultuous events in Hamunaptra years prior. Rick O'Connell, now a celebrated adventurer settled into domesticity, finds his quiet life perpetually punctuated by the spirit of adventure. Or, perhaps more accurately, the spirit of his incredibly energetic young son, Alex. Alex, already showing a distinct knack for history that mirrors his father's own initial reluctance and eventual embrace of the exotic, unearths something significant, perhaps a small artifact that whispers of impending doom. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carnahan O'Connell, whose keen intellect and surprising bravery turned her from a meticulous librarian into an adventurer of renown, is wrestling with the pressures of fame and motherhood. Her brother, Jonathan Carnahan, bless his perpetually luck-seeking heart, is still chasing fleeting riches, often stumbling into trouble that, inevitably, Rick and Evie must clean up. It's a testament to the enduring, if often chaotic, partnership formed between the bookish intellectual, the pragmatic explorer, and the slightly larcenous but loyal comic relief. The catalyst arrives swiftly. The ancient, malevolent spirit of the Scorpion King, Imhotep's former master, is stirring. This time, the threat manifests through a cursed necklace and a reawakening of dark forces in the Egyptian desert. Evie, perhaps seeking a return to the excitement that first bonded her and Rick, a bond forged in the heat of uncovering lost secrets, much like the inspiration drawn from the grand historical epics she devoured in her youth, dons the bracelet, unintentionally becoming a vessel for the wicked Queen Nefertiri. The journey back to Egypt is, naturally, less of a vacation and more of a desperate race against time. Rick, whose actions in previous adventures have clearly honed his instincts to near superhuman levels, is fiercely protective, yet constantly amazed by Evie's unwavering dedication to deciphering the ancient texts, even when those texts are actively trying to destroy the world. Their bond, cemented by shared near-death experiences, feels utterly authentic, moving beyond mere romance into a shared, slightly manic partnership. The film plunges us into thrilling set pieces. We see Alex, resourceful beyond his years, caught up in the action, perhaps navigating ancient traps with the innate cunning of someone who has grown up surrounded by relics and danger. Jonathan, unsurprisingly, finds himself in comical peril, often only escaping due to sheer luck or the timely intervention of others. A running gag that never quite wears thin, echoing the archetypal sidekick who survives through sheer obliviousness. The climax pits the O'Connells against the rising power of the Scorpion King, a physical manifestation of terror commanding vast armies of the undead. Rick, ever the man of action, relies on his military training and brute force, while Evie must confront the dark influence Nefertiri exerts over her mind, utilizing her knowledge not just of history, but of human and perhaps inhuman psychology. The entire affair is a frantic scramble to stop an apocalypse, driven less by intellectual curiosity this time, and more by the fierce instinct to protect their family and the world they've become accustomed to saving. The final confrontation is a symphony of explosions, ancient curses broken, and the satisfying, if slightly over the top, defeat of evil, allowing the heroes to return, perhaps a little more weary, but firmly united once more under the Egyptian sun. The atmosphere in the O'Connell household, despite the luxurious trappings of their London life, always feels slightly temporary, as if any moment a map might unfurl on the mahogany dining table and they'd be off again. Rick, whose rugged demeanor often masks a deep-seated loyalty, carries the weight of a man who knows true peace is fleeting. His eyes, accustomed to scanning horizons for threats, are now frequently drawn to the doorway, checking on his wife and son. He possesses a certain world-weariness, born not of boredom, but of having seen too much ancient horror juxtaposed against modern comforts. Evelyn, conversely, seems to thrive in the chaos. Her transformation from the shy Egyptologist who needed rescuing into the equal partner who often engineers the rescues is remarkable. One can picture her in her study, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, feeling a profound pull toward the danger she now confronts not merely academically, but physically. When she takes on the spirit of Nefertiri, there's a palpable tension as the precise, careful nature of Evelyn clashes with the ruthless, ancient ambition channeled through her. It's a struggle showcasing her mental fortitude, a quality perhaps inherited from her archaeologist father, whose legacy she strives to honor and surpass. Jonathan, of course, remains the embodiment of opportunistic charm. His presence in Egypt this time is less about scholarly pursuit and more about the pursuit of gold rumored to be tied to the Scorpion King's tomb, a reflection of his career trajectory where high-stakes adventures are merely seen as opportunities for unparalleled, if ill-gotten, financial gain. His panicked reactions and clumsy attempts at bravery serve as necessary comedic counterpoints to the deadly seriousness of the unfolding crisis, grounding the supernatural threat in a recognizable, flawed humanity. Alex, their son, represents the legacy, a third-generation adventurer already possessing a surprising understanding of dangerous situations. His abduction or entanglement in the quest is the true emotional lever that moves Rick and Evie past mere duty and into desperate action. He isn't just a plot device. He's the living symbol of the future they are fighting to preserve. When Alex deciphers an obscure symbol or navigates a collapsing corridor, it's clear that the spirit of adventure, the very thing Rick tried to leave behind, has claimed his son, creating an inheritance he must now help his son survive. The resurrected threat, the Scorpion King, is portrayed with a terrifying grandeur, drawing upon the cinematic iconography of powerful, ancient deities. A spectacle that reminds the audience that these heroes are constantly pitting modern resourcefulness against forces designed millennia ago to crush mortal will. The resulting battles are not just physical tests, but examinations of their enduring faith in each other. Every shared glance across a battlefield crawling with mummies speaks volumes about years of mutual reliance forged in tombs and desert sands, suggesting that even facing oblivion, the O'Connells operate as a cohesive, if perpetually stressed, unit. The desert heat itself feels like an adversary, relentless and unforgiving. A stark contrast to the cool, damp air of London they had just left. Rick, now clad in sun-bleached practical gear that speaks more of utility than fashion, moves with an economy of motion honed by years of dodging ancient traps and modern mercenaries. His protectiveness over Alex during the chase sequences is fierce, almost primal. It's the quiet acknowledgement that, unlike the past, where death was often a professional hazard, now it carries the unbearable weight of leaving a child behind. His love for Evelyn manifests not in flowery speeches, but in the way he seamlessly anticipates her needs, handing her a necessary artifact or covering her flank without needing a word exchanged. A non-verbal communication system developed under extreme duress. Evelyn's possession by Nefertiti introduces a fascinating internal conflict. When the Queen's aura surfaces, one sees a chilling stillness overlaying Evie's familiar features. It's a performance within a performance. The actress playing the Queen must briefly suppress the loving mother and devoted historian. This possession highlights the precarious balance she maintains. She wields knowledge like a weapon, but that same knowledge can be turned against her by the very secrets she seeks. Her internal battle is about maintaining sovereignty over her own mind, a fight far more intimate and terrifying than any skirmish with mummies. Jonathan, predictably, finds himself embroiled in the treasures again. But this time, his cowardice is laced with a desperate attempt to prove his worth, however accidentally. He trips into key solutions or runs away from danger so fast that he inadvertently clears a path for the heroes. His survival mechanisms, while comical, are a necessary reflection of the ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances, a humorous foil to Rick's unwavering competence. He seeks validation, perhaps, hoping that this grand adventure, unlike the smaller scores, might finally earn him genuine respect, rather than just exasperated tolerance from his sister. Alex, the true inheritor of this peculiar legacy, displays an almost uncanny ability to bridge the gap between historical artifact and modern application. He doesn't just read the ancient warnings, he understands the mechanism behind them. This suggests that while Rick found adventure accidentally, Alex is being born into it, a natural-born explorer whose playground involves relics that could end the world. His youthful enthusiasm for the puzzle-solving aspect of their predicament is both endearing and alarming to his parents. The visual spectacle of the Scorpion King's army rising underscores the scale of the threat. These are not the shambling horrors of before. This is an organized, imposing legion, demanding more than just bullets and bravery. It requires a synthesis of all their skills: Rick's tactical command, Evelyn's esoteric understanding, and Jonathan's sheer dumb luck, to coordinate the defeat of a creature whose power is rooted in millennia of belief and dark magic. The ultimate victory feels earned precisely because the cost, emotionally and physically, is so much higher than their first foray into Hamunaptra. They aren't just saving a tomb or a treasure. They are fighting for the continuation of their very unconventional yet fiercely cherished family unit against forces that seek absolute annihilation. The denouement of the confrontation leaves the desert irrevocably scarred, the echoes of ancient battle settling slowly into the sand. Rick, wiping grime and perhaps a trace of sweat that has little to do with the Egyptian sun, surveys the aftermath. His relief is profound, channeled not into celebration, but into a quiet, almost anxious gathering of his family. For him, success is measured by how quickly they can return to a semblance of normalcy. A life where the most dangerous thing Alex might bring home from school is a bad grade, not a cursed scarab. He looks at Evelyn, whose eyes are slowly clearing of Nefertiti's malice, and there is a silent agreement. They have pushed the boundaries of their shared calling one time too many, perhaps. The thrill is undeniably addictive, a drug only they understand, but the risk to their son is now the ultimate deterrent. Evelyn, shaking off the last vestiges of the ancient queen, feels a strange mixture of exhaustion and intellectual fulfillment. She has not only